So although MMOs are my main computer game interest, I've been into the main ARPGs of late, starting up with Diablo 4 in December. Been playing a bit of Path of Exile 2 of late as well. And when looking at some discussion forums, there's a bit of a question that pops up around POE 2 being a bit difficult. Now, I have to say, as a casual player who hasn't played Path of Exile, although I might in the future because POE 2 is pretty enjoyable, I have to say that initially I found some parts tough as well. So I thought I'd go over what difficulties I found, what I concluded about them, and how I overcame them in the hope that it's helpful to some people as well. Because, you get brainless responses like this on forums. They don't help, do they? I mean, look at it. The only reason people complain it's hard is because they are just bad at the game. It's like, yeah, that's what hard means, you numbnut. Surgery is hard if you're bad at it, which most of us are. Everything is hard when you're bad at it. That's what finding hard means. The response people are after is, how do they make it easier? But I can well appreciate how someone who has played Diablo 4, for example, would come to Path of Exile 2 and find it difficult. Diablo 4 is it has a very shallow learning curve, but you also get to control it every step of the way. If you feel you're ready to step it up, you can do so, get faster progression, better rewards. If it's a bit much, you just dial it down for a bit. You're still making progress on the same character in the same world. Not so much in POE 2 when you begin. In fact, one thing that strikes me about it is that there are difficulties in the very early game which disappear a bit later on and then sort of come back at end game, which is really a little bit mad. Like, you run out of mana in the first few levels. So mana management is a thing in the first few levels. Except, but then later on, it's not an issue at all. Except when you come against mana drain. Until again, much later in the game where I haven't got to it yet. So the point at which I'm in the game, still going through the campaign, I don't have mana issues. I don't really even prioritise upgrading my mana flasks because I just never use them. So, so I'm not going to talk about the end game anyway. This is about actually getting into the game. So the first thing I would say is that the game probably shouldn't give you a choice of keyboard or mouse movement. If you've come from Diablo to POE 2, as I did, you naturally choose mouse movement. It's what you used to, but this is a grievous error. It's way easier once you use keys for movement. After you've died a few times, you think, I'm not beating this, I don't know what's going on. And then you just use keys, it's like, oh yeah, that's it. Because in Diablo 4, there's movement, of course there is. You get out of the way of fear or stun circles. There are some other ground effects, but mostly you move to mobs, batter the crap out of them. Occasionally you shift out of a circle, carry on battering them, move to more mobs. Movement happens, but it's sporadically. In POE 2, you're constantly moving a lot of the time. Maybe except the warrior in that very early game, who can just stun lock stuff and take the beating between the stun gaps. Can't use your mouse for moving and targeting for attacks at the same time, so use keys for movement, makes life easier. Now that does create an extra problem, because now you've got more inputs for movement. You've got 4 inputs, whereas it used to be 1. And the game will only register so many key presses at once. In cases where, you only need a couple of attacks, okay, that sort of usually works out fine. But if you're using additional types of attacks, there's multiple buttons for movement and now multiple buttons for attacks, that can be a problem if you're circling and dodging around mobs or a boss. It will sometimes just not register the attack you've made because you're mashing movement and maybe potion keys. At the same time, you can't always just stand still to use those attack buttons because you might get one shot. So you have to be mindful and maybe stick to one movement key whilst trying to also use multiple attacks bound to the keyboard or mouse, whatever. Then there's the general issue of big hits and constant AoE in the game. Again, not familiar to Diablo 4 players. There's a need to be constantly moving in POE 2, it seems to me, even if that's just dodge rolling through the boss and back. Getting used to this and using corners to your advantage, using scenery to your advantage is a much bigger thing in POE 2, it occurs to me, than Diablo 4. And but there is one genuine area of difficulty, I would say. So all of those things are just aspects of the game where a different mindset, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is fine now. But I think that where there's a genuine difficulty compared with Diablo 4, the main competition, is talents, or passives as they're referred to. There's a lot of them, like 1,500 or something. So many, in fact, that if you consider all the skills available and then all the passives as well, it's actually very complex to make a build. And that's great for people who like a lot of involvement in building their character. But I think one huge failing in the game is not so much the complexity, but the fact that it doesn't lend itself to experimentation. If you have a complex situation, you're going to make more mistakes. So you want ways to be able to correct those mistakes. If you want to change out some skills, passives in Diablo 4, you know, whether it's the skills or the Paragon points, doesn't matter. There's a cost, but it's trivial with the gold you will have naturally acquired at the time. I have sometimes changed my build 3 times in a day in Diablo 4. I don't even think about the cost. It's nothing. It's negligible. POE2, when my mercenary, for example, I was about like level 20 and I realized, yeah, I've gone the wrong way here. This isn't working out for me. So I struggled on for a few more levels, but I've decided I'm better off cutting my losses here. So I'm left him alone. I'm either going to leave him until I've got way more gold on other characters. So at the moment I'm leveling a ranger, or just abandon that character and start it again as being quicker, which is silly. The skills are trivial to swap in and out. The skill gems, there's no cost to that. Why isn't this the case for passives? If the game designers wanted to say, oh, but we don't want to change them too regularly, it's like, well, it's a complex system. They're going to have to change them. But if you don't want them changing too regularly, okay, why not at least give you a sort of allowance? Like each character starts with 5 free passive changes and you accumulate an extra one each day that you log in on that character or something. But having such a complex talent tree, yet without any realistic way of doing much about it other than minor tweaks, unless maybe right into the end game you get so much gold that you can then do it. You know, but when you're leveling and it's like you just don't have the gold to do it, and that's without buying stuff off the merchant, and it's possible to go in completely the wrong direction very easily. That seems like a difficulty that doesn't need to be there. And it makes a huge difference. Initially, I just played the game without looking at any expert advice. I didn't like read guides before I sat down. You don't do that. So I was mostly taking down bosses very slowly on the first ranger I made, for example. Then I binned that one, followed a guide. And although I still get into tricky situations, most things just melt now, which shows the difference between having the right skills and passives and not. And it's not even like you can just look at the tree and plan it out. If you're new to the game, you can't really know how impactful some of these nodes are. You know, you don't know how useful they are until you've got some experience playing the game. And it's not reasonable to tell new players to just follow a guide. First of all, you want to try the game out. You just want to immerse yourself for a bit. Second, it's not even clear which guides will be the ones to follow until you've tried it out. There will be some people posting up builds that are better than others. How are you supposed to know which is the good one and which isn't until you've tried it? The way to approach any sort of RPG like this is play the game. If you get stuck, then you seek advice. And the game should accommodate that. And there's so much complexity to every aspect of the game. It's very easy to see why people will say POE2 is the game for serious players, not so much D4. I can totally see it. You can get very, very involved in Path of Exile 2. On the face of it, gearing looks as complex as in Diablo 4, but Diablo 4 gives you a lot of control over the customization of that gear, even during the leveling period. POE2, very random. So the onus is on you to know how to stack the odds in your favour of getting the qualities you need. But what I would say is this. I'm really enjoying the game. I'm very casual these days, so I will hit a wall in POE2 in a way that I won't with Diablo 4, for example. But after those initial difficulties, I did get on top of things. I'm not a good player. I did get on top of things by just stopping and thinking about the different nature of this game compared to others. Whereas I think someone who'd been more used to that constant moving style ARPG would have fit into POE2 much more easily. So I would say if you're struggling, I would do the following. First, if you're using mouse clicks for movement, don't use keys. The default WSAD is fine for me, but you can change them to whatever. Second, get used to constantly being on the move. Third, make sure your most used skills are on your mouse buttons, not just the first 2 skills you get. Fourth, with large or destructive groups of mobs and even some bosses, use the scenery. Like, don't wade in if you're not supremely confident. Pull stuff back around corners. Fifth, get lots of extra chance at finding rare gear stats. Sixth, once you have a handle on things, find decent guides. It is very complex. There's a huge difference between using an expertly crafted build and just making it up as you go along. Way bigger difference. Diablo 4, there are guides as well. And yeah, they make a bit of a difference. But I also found that I could just make it up and I was fine. the differences are more marginal in Diablo 4. But that's what I've found anyway. If you have other tips for the entry-level game, post them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.